Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is the Science Dispatch podcast. My name is Cameron English. That is Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. Chuck, it's lovely to see you as always.
And it's nice to be seeing you here in July, in the dog days of July, I guess. We're almost under the heat dome. It's coming our way.
It's coming your way. Got to crank up that AC, get the whole house fan going at night.
Yes.
Lots of water, lots of Gatorade. Keep yourselves hydrated out there.
I find very important. Bourbon works almost as well as Gatorade in terms of hydration.
Look, man, everything has water in it. You can't make bourbon without water, and so...
By definition.
Yeah. I'm no doctor, but Chuck is, so... Just kidding. Drink water. Water's good for you. Okay. We're not talking about water or bourbon, sadly. We're talking about a story you wrote for the website, acsh.org, a few days ago now. This is called A Doctor's Take on Trump's Ankles and Veins. I'm sure people have seen the news, or maybe not, Chuck. Maybe we're breaking this story to them. I'm going to read this introduction and then let you take it away. I did find hilarious that the very first line of your story is, "This falls square within my medical specialty, and it's about the president. Let's gossip." So you write, President Trump's reported chronic venous insufficiency sheds light on a common yet complex condition where faulty leg veins cause swelling, discomfort, and even skin discoloration. Here's what's really going on under the surface and why that daily aspirin might be making things murkier. Okay, Dr. Dinnerstein, take it away.
Like I said, I was very excited because my wife points out to me that sometimes I do right outside my wheelhouse, but this was clearly on board. I've had 30 years experience with venous insufficiency, acute or chronic, so I thought it was worth talking about. So last week, the press noticed that the president's ankles were swollen and that he had some makeup on his hand covering some area of discoloration. And the White House, in a break with tradition with other presidents, came out with a fairly quick, transparent medical report on the causes of both of them. They reported that the swelling in his legs was due to a condition called chronic venous insufficiency, and that the discoloration was due to overuse of his hand while he was handshaking. So the chronic venous insufficiency is really what most of us would think about in terms of varicose veins. They did an ultrasound, which is a way of looking at the veins and the arteries in the leg. And so while they didn't provide the report, I'm making the assumption that the reporting by his physician was accurate. And what it indicated was that either the deep or the superficial veins were not working properly. So the leg has two sets of veins. It has some superficial veins along the skin. Those are the ones that you would characteristically see and call varicose veins. Those big ropey kind of blue things that are seen. There are deeper veins within the substance of the leg that really carry the majority of the blood back to the heart. And when you think about it, since we are creatures that spend a great deal of time standing, the venous blood has no active way of getting back to the heart. There's no venous pump that pushes it up. And the way it gets from the legs back to your heart is that the muscles squeeze the veins and push the blood upwards towards the heart. And then when the muscles relax and the veins begin to open up again, there are a series of one-way valves that are built into the system so that the blood in kind of a stepwise way travels back to the heart. Venous insufficiency means that that valve has been destroyed, and therefore blood tends to collect in the leg. The pressure in the venous system is quite low, so that any kind of an increase in pressure causes the pressure to kind of back up throughout the entire plumbing, and it causes some swelling in the leg. So that explains the swelling in the president's leg. And they were very careful to say that there was no evidence of a clot, which is important to note. So I think we're in pretty good ground saying that he had a problem with the veins. The treatment for this has always been, for at least when it's in the deep system, more palliative than curative. We don't have any good operations to repair the valves. So the general treatment recommendations are to wear compression stockings to minimize the swelling, to use a moisturizer on the skin to prevent the skin from breaking down. And that's pretty much what we have. For the superficial varicoses, for the varicose veins, there's been a tidal wave of change since I started my training back in the Middle Ages of the 1970s. Before we became sophisticated people, we would just make multiple incisions and put a little device called a stripper in, which was nothing more than a long wire with a knob on the end of it, tied the vein to it, and just rip the whole thing through, and it would just rip out the vein. We don't do that any longer. Today we have more sophisticated ways of causing the vein to close. We can either inject a chemical to irritate the walls and keep them together, or we can apply ultrasound energy or thermal energy to cause an injury to the vein walls, which makes them sticky, and then by sticking them together they collapse. I would refer to it as we French fry the inside of the vein, but that's a technical medical term that you may not be comfortable with.
So thank you for that. That's helpful to sort of get a basic understanding of what's going on. And here we're speculating, but why do you think the White House came out and put out a report like that? As you said, it sort of breaks with precedent. Is it a way to sort of own the controversy and dismantle it before it turns into something they actually have to fight back against?
Yes. I think that they just wanted to get out front on this. They certainly wanted to do this in the context of the health concerns that were raised around President Biden and all of the controversy around what was shared and what was hidden from the American public. So I think they didn't want to get themselves caught into that kind of a cycle. So it was easy enough to get the test done and share that with the public.
So a way to boost perceived transparency, which is probably overall a good idea. But I think it moves us into the topic that you've already started to touch on, which is this balancing act between medical privacy for people in power and what the public has a right to know as voters, as taxpayers, as citizens that are affected by what this man says and does. You know, I guess maybe we can start with, how do you strike that balance? As a physician, what's your insight on that?
I don't have a good answer on that one, for sure. I mean, I think that one of the reasons that they were so readily transparent about it is because it's not a huge issue. It's more of a cosmetic problem than anything else. I think that you start to see leadership circle the wagons when the illness at hand has greater long-term implications, as in the case of King Charles and whatever stage his cancer might be at, or when it involves a cognitive problem that might affect leadership on a more acute basis. And while the case of President Biden comes readily to mind, one has to remember also the case of President Wilson, who had a stroke in office, and basically, from the historical records that we can glean, his wife and several other of his staff ran the presidency for the final portion of his term.
So the obvious, at least to me, the obvious line would be, you know, is there something that affects his ability to perform his duties? So I think, and it's been a while since I've looked this up, but I believe FDR, at least in the media, it was pretty widely known that he was paralyzed. But there was maybe some sense of propriety. They never reported that, at least while he was in office. And the idea being that you were in the middle of a war, we're not gonna make his legs this issue, right? Because the Nazis are a bigger obligation.
Even before he became, even when the period of time when he was running for president, he had significant mobility issues, which I guess in that time frame was considered something that the press didn't need to discuss. Much the same way as in the 60s, they didn't discuss any of the significant back problems or problems with the adrenal insufficiency that John Kennedy had. It just wasn't. I guess it wasn't something that gentlemen did, which right away tells you right away we have a very, very different press corps now than at that period in time. So I think there is a line between one's privacy and one's leadership role, and that I would tend to come down that the cognitive issues are probably, to my mind, more worrisome than mobility issues, because we can manage mobility issues. And in fact, with a chronic illness like cancer. So cancer, I think, in a lot of ways can be a chronic illness. I mean, one of the great breakthroughs in cancer care is not so much that we are curing a lot more people, but we are providing very satisfactory additional years of life. So prostate cancer, which is the largest cause of cancers among men, is only in rare instances is going to result in your death within a year or two. People are living 20 years out from that diagnosis. Same thing with breast cancer. Breast cancer, which used to be a much more short-term illness, has become a chronic disease with its own side effects. We have not had the same advances, say, with pancreatic cancer, which tends to, or glioblastomas, where people tend to be diagnosed late and they tend to not have a long-term prognosis from the time of being diagnosed.
Here comes the cynicism. I think what this illustrates, maybe not this specific case because they actually disclosed it, or maybe it still does, is that, I don't think the public's opinion on the president's health matters all that much. Because once we elect somebody, they're in power, the gears of government start to work. And I think even in the last administration, you saw them, and I don't know all the details, nobody does, but it was clear that there was information being withheld because they were trying to save face in different ways. And the moment that hit me was when, after the debate performance, where Biden was clearly struggling, they put Tony Fauci on TV and he said, it could have been real bad flu symptoms. And I'm thinking, and I'm like, okay, I'm not a doctor, but I've had the flu before. Right. And I've never struggled to get through a sentence. What that obviously looks like is it's dementia related to age. I mean, you know what I mean? So we got to a point where they were saying things with a straight face that were clearly unsubstantiated.
Right.
So I think
the problem came down to the fact that we could believe what they were telling us, or we could believe our lying eyes, and that I think was an interesting moment. It certainly was an interesting moment in the campaign. I mean, I've been following that along for some time, and the only time that I wrote about it for the website was in pointing out that as we age, our cognitive changes and our physical changes may deteriorate at different rates. And so I had no problem believing that while the president was showing that he wasn't quite as spry as he might be, that didn't necessarily mean that there was any kind of a cognitive difficulty. And I think that they were not truthful with themselves, and as a result, they were not truthful with us about how well the president was able to perform. I think, I think that this is not the first time that this has come up. I think we can say the same thing was true about Kennedy. The same thing was true about Wilson. The FDR, it clearly had mobility issues that were covered over. They're not always truthful about the presidents in general. Eisenhower had a girlfriend. Nixon told his own whole series of stories. Then we had a little pause in there when Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter were in office. There were no health issues, and there wasn't any problem. Though, interestingly enough, I would point out that Betty Ford was really a pioneer in saying the word cancer and bringing that into the American lexicon, as well as drinking, as alcoholism, both of which she was very straightforward in addressing with the public her own problems with that. And you got to give the woman a great deal of credit for doing that. Reagan, there's some questions about how things were going with the Gipper towards the end of that presidency. Bill Clinton didn't have any health problems, but he did have some other issues that could be addressed. We got a little break with the Bush boys, one and two, and here we are.
I had a drug policy expert tell me recently that if we legalize drugs, Washington, D.C. would absolutely implode in on itself because all the Republican staffers could openly do cocaine. They wouldn't have to hide in the bathroom anymore.
Oh, nice.
And so I think, all that goes to say, I think there's probably a lot that goes on that is hidden, and it lends credibility to this perception of functioning, albeit imperfect, government. So all that to say, I don't know if we would want to know everything that's going on that affects the health of the...
I would prefer to not know unless it came up. Now, they did change the Constitution and added an amendment specifically looking at the issue of a presidential disability, which was not invoked, but is evidently there as one of the safeguards against a small coterie of aides covering for the president. So I think we should take some value there. The other thing that I found interesting in looking at the issue, again, during President Biden's tenure, is whether the White House physician must testify as to the president's health. And the answer is no, that their obligation is to the president. Now, they can have their records subpoenaed. That can be done. And at that point, if the physician does not wish to speak about it, then they can be found in contempt of Congress or contempt of court, depending on where this plays out, and we'll have to face that penalty there. But there's no special exemption for the president from the usual privacy shields that would be there for anybody in their medical illnesses.
Yeah, it strikes me as sort of an old boys club. But the mechanisms are there should they want to use them, but nobody wants to use them for fear of them being used in retaliation. So that's my impression, is it's just sort of an unspoken, you don't subpoena my doctor's records. And, so, yeah.
Well, there's this, I just finished Jake Tapper's book, Original Sin, which talks about President Biden and whether they did or did not cover up his illness. And I came away from it kind of with very mixed feelings that one, I'd been lied to, and two, that the intent was not always to necessarily retain power. There was a lot of familial and friendship protection that they balanced and said it was better to be loyal to the president than, to the sake of argument, to the Constitution. And so I came away with as I said, a mixed feeling about it. Very similar to the feeling that I had when I went on a tour of the nuclear bomb shelter at the Greenbrier Hotel that Congress had built for themselves in the 1960s. So in case there was a nuclear war, they would have a place to go. Except actually I was a little bit more angry with them about that choice.
Yeah. Yeah, as we wrap up here, my standard tends to be if I know a certain piece of information, what am I going to do with it or do about it? And the answer is if everything was made known about the last president's cancer and his dementia or whatever it was, what would I do about it? The answer is nothing, right? If it was his wife or his staff running the joint, I'm still going to go to work and feed my kids dinner. You know what I mean? So I don't, not to sound too cynical as I do all the time, but
No, it's more, well, Tip O'Neill put it, all politics are local. You're just being hyper-local in terms of the politics that you wish to concern yourself with. And the politics you need to concern yourself with is, are you satisfying the needs of your wife and family at this moment in time so that you can hide somewhere else and do whatever you wish?
And that's why I get away with podcasting, is because I take care of my fatherly responsibilities. All right. Well, once again, Chuck's article, should you want to learn a little bit more about vascular health, is called A Doctor's Take on Trump's Ankles and Veins. That is at acsh.org. When you go there, click on the subscribe tab, punch in your email address. We will send you the stories that we publish. The ones you read are usually the ones we talk about. Make sure you check us out on social. It's at ACSH.org on X. We are on Instagram and Facebook as well. It's ACSH Matter of Facts and YouTube as well. This is all hosted by our colleague Anna Delaski. She does these great 1 minute, 2 minute videos breaking down some of your most pressing science questions and summarizing a lot of the content that we put out. So make sure you go check that out. Follow us there. Thank you for joining us as always, and we will see you next time.